there has not been an instance in the modern era. This I think comes from PokeStats. They said this on Twitter. In the modern era, which most people consider the modern era, the 2017
2016.
season onwards, like the fall of 2016
Yeah.
onwards, because that's when cash got added to the game. Whenever they started
The
paying the
game kind of
regional
blew up.
winners 5 grand. Um, so yeah, ever since then is kind of like considered the modern era of the game. And since that time, there has never been a tournament that all 8 decks were top eight, or not all 8 decks in top eight. Yeah, whatever. Be quiet. Don't laugh at me. All 8 decks in the top eight were the same deck. Now, I think it's maybe happened in the history. I'm sure at some point along the way, like Gardevoir in 2008, whenever that deck was
Yeah.
super dominant, I'm sure there was a time where that was all 8 spots in top eight. But even still,
Probably not all 8 though.
this is just something that doesn't happen. And why? What? So this is something that doesn't happen. How did it happen this weekend in Australia?
I mean, so I think, and even before, like a couple years ago, I don't think this would have happened in Australia. But I think in general with the game, like testing groups have become more of a thing and having more impact on the game. Like as of like 4 or 5 years ago. And what we see in Australia specifically is their tournaments are smaller, is one thing, right? So, I mean, their top players are still top players, right? It's not to say that their top players in the world aren't world class top level players. Henry Brand literally won worlds, of course, and they have multiple like players who have like top ICs and all that stuff. So it's just that when you take so many of the good players and then they all play the exact same deck. And that's what we really see with the group of like Kaiwin, Brent, Natalie, and so on, because they kind of dominated the other regional that Natalie won as well. That's going to have an impact on it for sure. And they played. Kaiwin and Christian literally played a mirror match in the finals, which does not happen very often.
No.
Even when you have these groups of great players playing the exact same list, and even multiple making top eight, getting that mirror match in the finals is really, really hard. We've only seen that like a couple times. The only other one I remember, I was close to doing it in Knoxville with Danny, but then Xander and I forget who else played SB Garb at Portland Regionals when Lucario came out, and they had a mirror match in that final. That's like it's very rare that same 60 mirror. I don't even know if they're playing the same 60, but that's like
I
one of
don't
the times. That's the only
remember.
time. But like it very rarely happens to begin with. But I mean, I think that's an impact. Um, Maybe people not respecting Palkia as much as they should and thinking that their decks stood up fine. Like people still playing stuff like Arceus and Teleon, or Mew players not really being as prepared for it. Or Palkia maybe is just really that ridiculously good. And that's why we saw 8 of them in the top 8, but it was pretty close. Like there was like the next couple decks in top 16, some of them were on Winninins. I know Natalie tied the Winnin. I'm not sure what Natalie played up against. So if Natalie had lost, maybe that deck would have made it into top 8. So I think it's a little bit of an anomaly, a little bit of all the best players in Australia choosing, or most of the best players in Australia choosing to play Palkia. A little bit of like the testing group thing going on. Like I said, if they're all going to bring Palkia and they're all the best players in Australia, I mean, it doing really well isn't a surprise. All 8 being Palkia, I think it might just be a little bit of an anomaly. Like I think if you ran the same tournament again, I don't think you'd have 8 Palkia in top 8 if everyone played the exact same decks, right?
Yeah, probably not, but honestly, maybe. Just because, like you said, the events, there's just not as many players. It was about 200, I think 198 is the exact
Yeah,
count. Sorry, 195, looking at it right
yeah.
now, is the
Biggest
exact count.
biggest regional in Australia as well. But I think by someone tweeted out by 25%, so that's quite a big
Yes.
uptick for sure. Especially like the other ones were pretty close. The first 2 regionals they had were pretty close to the numbers of the regionals they had previously in the same areas, and then this one just like seemed to shoot way up, which is great because the game's growing over there.
Yeah, and I mean, comparing this to what we've seen from the North American regionals so far this year, kind of the like best large testing group that we've seen do really well is like the Isaiah Bradner, Rahul Reddy, John Eng, Sam Chin group. I don't know if I'm missing
Xander,
anyone else in there. Xander as well. Yeah, he hasn't been to all the regionals, I don't think. Justin Bakari as well. But like that kind of crew, they always play the same 60. And we've seen several regionals where they've all made day 2, but our
yeah,
tournaments are just so much bigger. There's more rounds in day 2, right? So there's more
yeah.
opportunity for variants or bad matchups and stuff to pop up. And this Palkia deck is not without its bad matchups, which we can talk about when we get into it a little bit deeper. But whenever you're only playing 8 or 9, or what is 8 rounds of Swiss day 1, cutting
It was
straight to a
8,
top
yeah.
8, is
Yeah.
a big difference of playing 9 rounds into 5 more rounds into top 8. There's just more chances for
Yep.
things to break up, and this is not at all discrediting any of the Australian players. We think all the Australian players, that have have won these tournaments are like, world class players. We've said time and time
Oh
again.
yeah.
So they're definitely qualified, and that is a huge aspect as to why they are dominating and doing so well at these events, because they are the best in the country. But it's a big difference. And whenever it's a smaller field and you have a higher concentration of these players, it's really not that big of a surprise to see 3 out of 5 people in a testing group make top 8.
Yeah, for sure. Definitely has like definitely an impact on it as well. But yeah, I mean, yeah, like I think there's a couple different factors that went into why there was, and then of course Henry Brand as well chose to play Palkia, made top 8. No one's surprised that Henry's in top 8, and Henry chose to play Palkia. So Henry being in top 8 with a Palkia deck, like,
Yeah.
I mean, it's
I
just
mean,
gonna
and
happen.
also it's the new big card, and it's obviously very
Yeah.
powerful. So I think people were excited to try the new card.